What happens when an entire nation suddenly loses faith in its own banks? What happens when millions of people, almost overnight, decide their life savings are safer under their mattresses than in financial institutions backed by their government? Right now, this is exactly what is unfolding inside Russia. A silent panic has begun to roar like thunder. Crowds are forming at ATMs, queues are snaking outside bank branches, and frantic Russians are rushing to withdraw cash as if tomorrow will never come. The reason? The Kremlin has just revealed its chilling plan to transform the national budget for 2026 into a full-blown military war budget. And the people understand perfectly well what that means. The government will dig directly into their pockets to fund its ambitions. The announcement was first hinted at by Ministry of Finance of Russia, commonly known as MIDO, and then brazenly confirmed by Vladimir Putin himself. From that very moment, a wave of fear swept across the Russian public. Many have lived through the collapse of the Soviet Union, the hyperinflation of the 1990s, and the banking defaults that wiped out entire fortunes overnight. They know the signs. They recognize what it means when a government with a shrinking economy and rising desperation suddenly declares that the next national budget will be dedicated to war. They understand that the state coffers are running dry and whatever remains will be taken from ordinary citizens. That understanding has triggered a storm of mass cash withdrawals, shaking the very foundation of Russia's financial system. This dramatic run on banks is not happening in isolation. It is the visible symptom of deeper spreading cracks within the Russian economy. While some optimists in the United States and European Union still cling to the illusion that Putin might soon seek peace negotiations, the reality inside Russia tells an entirely different story. The Kremlin is not preparing for peace. It is digging in for years more of war, and it is doing so while its economic engine sputters and stalls. Here is the brutal truth. Russia's economic lifeline, its oil and gas sector, is faltering. Global oil prices have been steadily slipping, and forecasts for the coming months are grim for Moscow. This collapse in energy revenues strikes at the heart of the Russian budget, which has long relied on oil and gas exports to fund everything from social services to military adventures. As prices decline, the cost of gasoline inside Russia is paradoxically rising, creating a painful squeeze for consumers and businesses alike. This toxic mix is draining confidence in the economy and accelerating the public's rush to pull their money out of banks before it evaporates in a wave of inflation or currency devaluation. Adding to this financial instability is the sharp collapse of Russia's GDP. When Putin launched his so-called blitzkrieg invasion of Ukraine, the country's GDP growth stood at 4.3%. That growth has since plummeted to around 1%, and even those official numbers are widely suspected of being massaged by Kremlin-friendly statisticians. Putin himself has shown open dissatisfaction with these figures, yet in a bizarre twist of Russian political theater, he continues to boast of supposed military successes while acknowledging the country's deepening budget crisis. This is the Russian paradox on full display, a leader loudly declaring victory while his economy quietly bleeds out behind the curtain. This contradiction has become impossible to hide. The war that was promised as a quick operation has dragged on and on. What the Kremlin once called a special military operation has now consumed nearly 4 years and shows no signs of ending. Soon it will have lasted longer than World War II did for the Soviet Union itself. And here lies another bitter irony, one that has not been lost on the Russian public. From 1939 to 1941, the Soviet Union was actually in partnership with Nazi Germany, jointly carving up Poland. In Russian official memory, the Great Patriotic War only began in 1941 and ended in 1945, a 4-year span. Now Putin's war in Ukraine is on track to surpass even that. This revelation has sent a chill through many Russians, especially the older generation who grew up on stories of the Great Patriotic War as a symbol of resilience. Instead, they now see a war that has dragged Russia into economic ruin and international isolation. The financial fallout is staggering. Russia's entire federal budget today is comparable to the budget of the Texas state government or to the national budget of Italy. That comparison is shocking when one considers that Russia is the largest country in the world by land mass. It possesses vast natural resources and spans 11 time zones, yet its economy has shriveled to the size of a single US state or a mid-sized European country. This contrast exposes the hollow core of the Russian economic model, a model built on resource extraction, corruption, and militarization rather than innovation or prosperity for its people. And now, with the Kremlin openly declaring that 2026 will be another military year, Russians can see clearly where what little wealth remains will be going, not into schools or hospitals, but into bombs, tanks, and graves. This realization has fueled the current bank panic. Many Russians fear that as the government scrambles for funds, it will raid private bank deposits, impose new taxes, or let the ruble collapse to inflate away its debts. These are not irrational fears. Russia has done similar things before. In past crises, the Kremlin has frozen bank accounts, restricted withdrawals, and even seized hard currency from private citizens. The memory of these events has never faded, and it now drives the stampede to withdraw cash before it is too late. The result is a self-fulfilling spiral. As more people pull their money out, banks grow weaker, which convinces even more people to withdraw, accelerating the collapse. Meanwhile, Putin continues his surreal doublespeak. On one hand, he insists that Russia is not even at war, still clinging to the fiction of a special military operation. On the other hand, he demands an ever-expanding war budget, speaking openly about the need for more military spending to sustain the fight in Ukraine. This blatant contradiction has become too absurd for many Russians to ignore. If there is no war, why is the government planning a war budget? Why are tens of billions of rubles being siphoned into the military while domestic infrastructure crumbles? These questions are spreading fast, whispered in bank lines and muttered in living rooms across the country, fueling further mistrust in the state and its institutions. The scale of waste is staggering. Instead of repairing crumbling housing, upgrading hospitals, or installing basic sanitation in rural areas, the Kremlin is preparing to burn through billions more on a war that has already shattered its economy. For many Russians, the sheer insanity of this policy is finally hitting home. They see their towns stagnating, their wages shrinking, their savings at risk, and yet the government is planning to sacrifice even more lives and wealth in pursuit of territorial fantasies. The public mood is turning from passive despair to quiet rebellion, expressed not in protests, which are brutally suppressed, but in the only safe form left, taking their money and fleeing the banks. The consequences of this financial exodus could be catastrophic for the Russian banking system. Banks operate on trust. They take deposits from the public and lend them out, relying on the assumption that not everyone will demand their money back at once. But that trust is evaporating. As withdrawals accelerate, banks are being forced to call in loans, dump assets, and plead for emergency support from the central bank. This, in turn, creates more panic, as rumors spread that banks may soon impose withdrawal limits or even shut down temporarily. The specter of a full-blown banking collapse now looms over Russia like a dark cloud. Internationally, the implications are just as severe. Foreign investors, already wary of Russian markets due to sanctions and geopolitical risks, are now fleeing even faster. Capital flight is surging. The ruble continues to weaken, pushing up the cost of imports and further stoking inflation. Russia's foreign currency reserves have been heavily depleted to prop up the ruble and fund the war effort, leaving little cushion to stabilize the banking system if it collapses. In short, the entire financial structure of Russia is now trembling, and the Kremlin's decision to prioritize military spending in 2026 may be the final blow that topples it. The most disturbing part is that this collapse is not accidental. It is the logical result of the Kremlin's choices. By pouring its dwindling resources into a war that has no clear end, the Russian government is sacrificing the economic stability of its own people. It has chosen guns over bread, conquest over prosperity, and the Russian people, who for years tolerated corruption and mismanagement in exchange for a semblance of stability, are now realizing that even that bargain has been broken. The state can no longer protect their savings, their livelihoods, or their future. So they are protecting themselves the only way they can, by draining their accounts before the system implodes. This is the context the world must understand when hearing Western voices claim that Putin might soon seek peace. Inside Russia, everything points in the opposite direction. The government is not preparing to end the war, it is preparing to escalate it, even at the cost of destroying its own economy. The mass bank withdrawals now sweeping the country are not just a financial phenomenon. They are a silent referendum on the Kremlin's war. Every ruble withdrawn is a vote of no confidence, a small act of defiance against a regime that has betrayed its people. If this trend continues, Russia could face a financial collapse on a scale not seen since the 1990s. That era was marked by empty store shelves, unpaid salaries, and desperate poverty. The social fabric of the country nearly disintegrated. Today, the ingredients for another such collapse are all present: a shrinking economy, falling energy revenues, rising inflation, capital flight, and now a nationwide loss of faith in banks. The only thing missing is a trigger, and the announcement of a 2026 war budget may have just pulled that trigger. The Kremlin believes it can control this storm. It believes repression, propaganda, and central bank intervention will be enough to contain the panic. But trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to restore. And as more Russians line up to withdraw their money, the illusion of stability is shattering. The world is witnessing the early stages of a financial implosion inside Russia, an implosion born from the regime's own hubris and delusions. The war Putin promised would last weeks has dragged on for years. The economy he claimed was strong is crumbling. The banks that once symbolized stability are now scenes of fear and desperation. And the people who once quietly endured are now quietly rebelling with their wallets. This is the real state of Russia today, a nation bleeding wealth, trust, and time, all to feed a war that is consuming it from within. Unless something changes, 2026 will not mark the triumph of Russian power. It will mark the bankruptcy of the Russian state, both financially and morally. The world should watch closely, because the collapse is no longer a distant possibility. It has already begun, and every empty ATM and shuttered bank branch in Russia is a warning of what is to come.